understand by the digital in general terms, and then you'll see how that works out in more grounded terms through the individual studies. The other editor, Wang Xinyuan, can't be here, but her first book, which was actually her PhD, which was this book, Social Media Industrial China, was about how factory workers came out from the villages, and it was like a dual migration. They moved into the factories, but they also moved simultaneously from offline to online, and which brought them into, in a sense, modern China. And it's an amazingly successful book. According to JSTOR, it's the second most downloaded open access book across all academic disciplines. Her new book, I think, is even better. Came out recently, Aging Smartphones in Urban China. And again, it's kind of dual, because it's basically arguing that to understand the smartphone revolution, particularly how older people have been transformed their lives with smartphones, you have to understand their experience of the Cultural Revolution and how one sets up the foundation for the other. They're both free downloads in UCL Press. And just the other point about that is that the first book was part of a global project, which had two field sites within China. The other one by Tom McDonald, now teaching in Hong Kong, working in rural China. And it set up something about what we're still trying to do, because they were radically different books. They're both in China, but they had very little in common at all if you actually look at the details of those monographs. So it already set up the diversity of whatever one means by China. Just to mention, a lot of our work is available in Chinese for those interested. My books are translated, and that includes the original textbook for our work in digital anthropology, the new book on global smartphone, also available, again, free and in Mandarin. There's obvious reasons why we would be particularly interested within digital anthropology in China, because essentially anthropology is a comparative discipline, and there is only one comparison, really, in the sense that the rest of the world tends to share a particular set of platforms, and if you like, a digital ecology, you know, the Google, the Amazon, the YouTube. China is the place we have that is different, where you've got the WeChats and the Alipay and the Tencent and all the rest of it. So if you're interested in the comparative, clearly you're interested in understanding what we can understand as the consequence of the digital, then China has a particular centrality to digital anthropology itself. Within that, of course, China has its own, what we call polymedia, that is the relationship, the structural relationship between the different sites. So within China now, you can see the sort of play-off between things like Bilibili, Kuaishou, Red, where, for example, the students coming into us are likely to be using Red, you know, more rural people, maybe Kuaishou, etc., etc. So they form a kind of pattern internally as well as a comparison externally. Another interesting comparison is when you have ByteDance producing Douyin and then also TikTok. There are some differences, but do those explain the fact that in some ways these are very different platforms when seen ethnographically in different regions? So, you know, is it technological, or are there other factors that explain those differences? Another very obvious factor is that we don't have anywhere else that has this particular context. The relationship to the party state in China makes for all sorts of important issues when we're trying to think about the impact of the digital. So, for example, from an outside perspective, looking at what's been going on in China, it's like, on the one hand, The Economist a few weeks ago was pointing out that, you know, the investment by the state in these digital technologies in China is the biggest investment in human history, apparently. And yet we also read about these extraordinary curbs of the corporations, you know, including government curbs that reduce their value to a considerable extent. So from an outsider's perspective, it's sort of difficult to work out what actually is going on and whether to kind of make sense of that. So that's kind of why one would be interested anyway. What I now want to do is focus on that sort of point that allows us to think about this in more general terms, which is this issue of why does this challenge what we mean by the digital? So I'm thinking in really sort of broad ideological terms. What does the meaning of the digital itself? When we did our first book in 2012, we tried to give a definition of the digital. We said, oh, it's stuff that can be reduced to code and to bits, etc. Which, in retrospect, was kind of maybe problematic anyway as a definition, but it's not really the meaning of the digital, because for an anthropologist, the meaning of the digital is going to be much more. It's like, what are its connotations and consequences of the term? So the meaning of the digital includes the way it kind of is iconic for thinking about the modern. You know, oh, is your company using sufficient AI? Or are we using ChatGPT, or whatever it is. So, you know, being digital, becoming digital, how digital we are, digital divide, all of these things are much broader issues that come up when we start to think about what the digital itself represents. And that includes the moral connotations of the digital, or the condemnations that we hear every day about what the digital is doing to us, you know, the threat to humanity of, you know, digital addiction or loss of attention span, all the rest of it, or sometimes the opposite, you know, the hype around, are we becoming, you know, cyber humans, or is there a digital solution, you know, whatever the problem, there's an app for that kind of hype. It's kind of really, how can I put it, subtle or moderate in the way that it's discussed, or just about, you know, just what people just do with these things, which again suggests that it is a highly ideological concept. There is much more going on there in terms of its moral and other and normative implications as a term. So what about in China? Well, what we try to do is think about the digital technology as the latest iteration of technology. And that means you have to think about what has technology historically meant in China. So if you think about it in terms of, you know, Brazil's longue durée, what it has meant over centuries, if not millennia. When I was a student, actually, I was going to the lectures of Joseph Needham, who was writing Science and Civilization in China at the time, which was really the first time one paid proper respect, maybe, to that history of technology as it developed in China with Chinese innovations and so forth. One of the people who worked with him was Francesca Bray, who an anthropologist. And one of the points she makes is, you know, you have then to think, which, I mean, I speak no Chinese, I've never worked in China, so I'm getting it all through the students, but trying to understand that actually this may correspond to a lot of different terms, Chinese terms, none of them that are going to exactly equate with what we mean by technology. And that sort of tradition point has tried to sort of examine then what the connotations were in the Chinese context. So you have things like Song Yinxin 1637, Tiangong Kuaiwu, which is a sort of survey of technology at the time. But what Bray and others have argued is sort of interesting about this is the sense that technology is understood essentially in terms of the sort of imperial state's obligations as the sort of almost a representative of the divine to the population. That technology is how you improve the welfare of populations and how you sustain harmony amongst the population as a whole. So it's very much part of that ideal about how the state takes responsibility for the further development and sustaining of the Chinese population. And technology, therefore, has its own ideological, moral connotations, which are built around that. If that's the longue durée, then it's also associated with, if you like, a shorter durée, because in the shorter durée, and this is surely very familiar, we have the issues in China where you've had the sort of colonial humiliations from the British, from the Japanese, etc., and that also seen in terms of the issue of kind of, you know, the things that are produced, the technology that is produced in China. So when I was a child, the term made in China was synonymous with things that were going to break in 2 days. Even if they weren't made in China, the actual term made in China meant it was rubbish. And that was an assumption. So there's that additional humiliation, if you like, that not only into the colonial history, but also even extends to the idea of Chinese technology, the very opposite, if you like, of the Joseph Needham respect for Chinese technology. So not surprisingly, given all that, what we see as the mission over time is the desire for technology to also repudiate itself, to become something entirely different, to leapfrog, to be the vanguard and the symbol of China moving forward and actually repudiating all of that, and in some ways getting back to that older traditional ideal of what technology could represent, but this time through digital technologies. Now, one of the points I want to make is that this can be seen as I said, ideology in the Chinese sense, because it's also very much about notions of quality. So I talked about the way in which technology is seen as producing, as it were, the welfare and the harmony of the state, but it also comes down to this question of, made in China, is also about quality, and the quality pertains to people and to things. So a very common term that anthropologists think about all the time when they're looking at what's going on in China is the sense of suji. And actually, several of the chapters in our book look at the way digital technology is being used by people to increase the sense of suji, the sense of quality of people. But the je element, also sometimes conjoined with other things like pinja, is also something that can apply to technology. So we have this concern with how do we increase and improve quality that can pertain to people and also that can pertain to technology, and that this is, in a sense, the mission of the digital. Now, all of this in part explains things about what's going on in China that would otherwise be difficult to explain. So yes, of course, that then brings out this incredible investment in digital technology and what it can do to improve the welfare of China, but there's also the harmony of China. So inasmuch as the state is concerned with both sides of that, anything that the corporations are doing that are seen as potentially threatening that means you're going to get a curb on the corporations. So from the point of view of the traditions of what technology means in China, this duality of investment but also curb makes sense. It continues that historical tradition of what technology means. And when I call this ideology, that in a sense is made clear by the way it also exposes the ideology of the digital technology as it is understood here, because we are equally, if not more, ideological, in the sense that, I did a book recently which has chapters on Adorno and Heidegger. They may not have liked each other very much, but they certainly agreed with the idea of technology as a threat to our basic humanity. That technology was always to be feared, and with the rise of industrial revolutions, forms of capitalism, etc., it was always this sense that humanity in some ways is diminished if we are orientated towards the technological. And there were many, many versions of that in Western philosophy, but also more colloquially and more generally in the way we talk about it and think about it. So when these digital technologies arise here, it was almost always couched in terms of the virtual and the real, right? Real was human, virtual is not. So from the beginning, it continues the Western ideological dualism of separation and threat. So ever since then, whenever anybody comes to, I've been doing this 20 years, they get a lot of journalistic inquiries. And all the journalist inquiries I ever get are essentially intended to confirm the threat of the digital. So they will always be asking about addiction, loss of attention span, screens instead of people, and the things you read in the newspapers every single day. But when I talk to the students coming out from China, they don't, that exists in China, but it certainly does not have the same sense of dominance. It isn't particularly, was not discussed particularly in terms of real virtue, much more in terms of what it can do in terms of welfare and harmony. So the point I'm making is not that China is more ideological, but what I said at the very beginning, thinking about it in terms of China helps expose the ideological basis of our understanding of the digital. And very briefly, one more example of this kind of longue durée thinking is another area of the digital that people kind of look on from the West and kind of wonder about is things like the social credit system. And in fact, one of the new PhD students is working on Sesame Credit. And this wider sense of ranking and of personal dossier as characteristic of what's going on in terms of the party state's relationship to people in China. And one of the things she did recently was show why people in China see this very differently. And in fact, one of the reasons for that would again be history. That there's a nice article by Ming Zheng about the sort of prehistory of this, that actually the notion of data and a personal dossier has been going on for centuries. It was in the Tang dynasty, Mao made a lot of use of it, etc., etc. This is not, as it were, so new. And in a way, I guess, I mean, I'm no expert, but I would have thought that having a place where dominated by an imperial bureaucracy compared to a region that is dominated by traditional aristocracy, not like that surprising that the ways of thinking that would relate to things like that system would have a much longer history and be pervasive and continue to have a resonance in the way these things are thought about today. Okay, so that's like big picture stuff, which the book certainly tries to do. But within that, we then try and consider these case studies which ground it in ethnographic experience. And Chun will start off by giving her presentation, followed by Xiang Kunyu and Zheng.
Well, then he talks about the digital as the digital in China in big terms. My chapter in specific brings down the big term to local terms, and it looks at how the digital is working in the specific Chinese network. My chapter is about the networks that traders are building to organize multi-target business from southwestern rural China to east urban China, and the role that the digital are playing in transforming how these networks are reorganized. As you can see, here is matsutake mushroom. It has a very long poetic history in Japan as a luxury food, and it recently became very popular in China, also as a food of indulgence, novelty, and luxury, which of course are very expensive and are consumed by wealthy people in eastern Chinese cities. And it grows in the forest of my hillside village, the Shangri-La area in southwestern rural China, which is an area categorized as the impoverished. Almost every household in my field site is actively participating in this matsutake economy. Every household will have at least one picker picking the mushroom and sell them to the local traders in their village. They do that for 2 months during the summer, and that will take about 40% of their yearly household income. So how this matsutake business is organized all the way from southwestern rural China to eastern China across thousands of miles. This is how it looks like conventionally. So from here, you see, this is so-called small bosses, and those are the traders in mountain village, and they collect matsutake mushroom from the pickers, and then they send to so-called third boss, who are in river village, in lower village, and then the third boss send to second boss, who are in more central village, and the second boss send to big boss, who are in cities such as Kunming, Chengdu, and Shangri-La. And then it goes all the way to retailing supermarket and then to matsutake consumers. Well, when we look at this economic network, there's actually very strong social components in it. For example, like those pairs of traders, they have known each other for many decades. Most of them have probably spent their childhood with each other, and several of them are related, are relatives to each other. Meanwhile, the whole network is also a social hierarchy, which is expressed by how people address the traders. For example,
Sorry, can you be nearer the microphone?
oh, sorry. So for example, when you are looking at all the way there, like small bosses, they are from the mountain village, and the higher village are considered the lowest in status. And then the third boss, who are from river village is slightly higher in status than mountain village. And then second boss in central village, which is the higher than the river village. And then the big boss who are in the cities, who are considered the higher status than all of those people. So from here, you really see this sense of ranking, which Danny has talked about briefly, and Kunyu will expand more in her research. So this kind of social hierarchy and social relations in this economic network really resonates with previous anthropological research on China. For example, Skinner talks about how the commercial is really an extension rather than the opposite of the social structure in Southwest China. And Martin in specific talks about how money is not disruptive to, but constructive to the social relations in China. So why this network is so important for these traders is especially because the materiality of Matsutake mushroom. Matsutake mushroom is something that grows very quickly, and the value drops to its half within 1 day. That means as a trader, you need to sell your Matsutake mushroom within 1 day, and that means you will have a stable buyer. To make sure that your stable buyer has a stable supplier, then as a trader, you also need to have a stable supplier. And because it works on a daily basis, so they really depend on each other, and the mutual dependence is built on the stability of each trader, which then altogether is constructing the stability of the entire network. However, because of WeChat, the development of the digital, this conventional network is disturbed. Nima, this trader in Mountain Village, is using WeChat to develop brokers directly in Eastern Chinese cities, who then Nima will be able to buy all the mushroom directly from Mountain Village and send them in boxes to traders to consumers in Eastern Chinese cities. And by doing that, he's cutting off all these middlemen in between. But he's not doing that every day because he's not receiving orders from those consumers in Eastern cities every day. However, because he's being able to do that, because he's being able to cut off all the middlemen, that means he's able to harvest all their profits in between, and it's affordable for him to buy Matsutake from local traders at a much higher price than local traders. And that means some traders are no longer able to get Matsutake mushroom because this Nima person is buying all of them, especially when Matsutake mushroom is not like very large quantity. And it disturbs this network because it makes all these middlemen very unstable. And by being unstable as each individual, the entire network is becoming unstable. And so by doing that, with WeChat, Nima is actually disturbing this long established network that has been operating for like decades. And that's the consequence of WeChat in the village. In parallel, in Shangri-La town, Matsutake trade is also conducted with a socio-economic network. Within this image, you can see that this is the image that I took in the market of Matsutake mushroom in Shangri-La. And all the traders, they know each other and they're greeting each other. In this context, there are several hotel owners in Shangri-La town who can sell Matsutake mushroom directly to wealthy people because those wealthy people came to Shangri-La as tourists and they stayed at the hotel. During their stay, they developed this kind of very good host and guest relationships with each other. Before the time of WeChat, this kind of a good relationship really fades away very quickly after tourists came back to their home. However, with WeChat, they add each other on WeChat and they are looking at each other's posts and they interact by liking each other's posts and sometimes will make repetitive purchase to each other. In other words, WeChat is making fleeting social relations durable. And by becoming durable, those relationships become accumulative. And so this trader, this person, she's actually accumulates like 7,000 consumers on her WeChat within 5 years. And this is a visualization, this is a map that we made together. This is a map that of all the orders of matsutake mushroom she sent to during 1 year. And it's like when I proposed to do that, she's sorting them out and to look at where are all the cities that she's sending matsutake mushroom to. Sorry. In comparison, in 2020, there are lots of live streamers who are from Eastern Chinese cities. They are very they flood in matsutake mushroom markets, and they thought, oh, if the hotel owners can make very successful business by cultivating this personal network with consumers, then they probably can use algorithm-generated network to do a similar kind of business, because algorithm-generated network is much more efficient to make a network. Those traders, they take, for example, those hotel owners, they take, for example, like 5 years to build a network that works. However, with algorithm, you can just have this kind of network within 1 second. But it didn't work, it failed. And they just left very quickly within 3 years. You can barely see any of the live streamers within 2023. And why do they fail? So there are 2 likely reasons. One of them is made by observation of local experienced WeChat traders. They said many are watching, but very few are buying. By saying that, they mean those people who are watching the video are not necessarily consumers of matsutake. They might be interested in Shangri-La, they might be interested in markets, they might be interested in looking at people bargaining, but they're not necessarily interested in eating matsutake mushroom. So this algorithm-generated network that is made up with wrong type of people. And the second likely reason is clarified by anthropological research on China, because previous research shows that the economic network that works in China really is an emulsification of the social and economic. But within those 2 images, those are 2 pictures that I took when the live streamers are still there. You can really see that they are not very social people. On the image on the left, so this live streamer, so she took her phone and live streaming the matsutake mushroom in the market. But then you can really see she's not part of the social domain in these local traders. And this is another strategy of doing live streaming, which is build a very small studio inside the market. And this person is just talking to 5 phones, and he's saying what you see is what you will get as a commodity. And he's not really emotionally engaging with all these audiences. And from those images, you can see how fundamentally unsocial those live streamers are, and the algorithm generated networks are. And it's very likely that's the reason why they can't work. So in conclusion, as a study of digital China, this research tries to understand the digital in the Chinese specificities of trade networks, which emulsify the social and economic, which is a very specific Chinese characteristic. And as a study of digital network, I debate the most influential scholar in network studies, Manuel Castell. He argues that network is really diffusing through social structure. So the more the network grows, the more it disassociates from the individual. And then he called it the most fundamental contradiction in the network digital era. However, with this ethnography, we really see that people like Nima and like hotel owners, they are actively crafting their personal network, which are so successful that they are transforming the social structure that they are situated in. So this ethnography really calls for a fundamental rethinking of the relationship between network, social structure, and individuals. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Chun Liu, and it's my great honor to be here and present my chapter from this upcoming book. So this chapter is part of the broad project I did for my PhD. Basically, this project explores how short video social media, especially Douyin, Kuaishou, and WeChat channels, how people use these platforms and the impact of their usages. So the field work was conducted in Enshi. Enshi is a fourth-tier city and also a county-level city in central China, Hubei province. And here is a map to show its location. The term fourth-tier city here refers to the city that is relatively modest in terms of urban scale, economic development, infrastructures, and cost of living compared to the major cities such as Beijing, Shanghai, Shenzhen, and Guangzhou. And the city tier system is very important in my research. It is based on economic performance and uses various socio-economic parameters for classification. It is not officially proposed, but originated from the general consensus of some economists, businesses, and also consultants. They are also very often referred to in some media publications. But the Chinese people use this terminology all the time and take it for granted. However, this concept does not exist or matter in other societies. For instance, in the UK, we talk about classes rather than the city tier. So it is a very unique Chinese phenomenon. In this slide, I give you a sense of the positionality of Enshi. As you can see, on the top are the first-tier cities, and then second and the third tier. Enshi as a fourth-tier city is in the middle, and at the bottom are the rural areas, such as some small villages. So the positionality here suggests that the life in Enshi is neither like that of those major cities, nor entirely rural. And after giving this background information about my project, I now go into the details of this chapter. So this chapter specifically explores how social media intersects with the local normativity. The main argument is that short video social media not only change people's life, but also brings about continuity by maintaining the cultural norms, such as the long-standing values, ethics, and morals. And because the normativity guides human behaviors, its reflection and reinforcement through the short video social media highlights the humanized aspect of the digital technology. And this actually directly supports the Dennis Mann argument about the importance of our book. And I have two cases to illustrate this. So in Enshi, particularly among the middle-aged and elderly residents, the value of community or being modest is highly regarded, especially when it comes to the display of wealth. So on one hand, people tend to avoid openly expressing their desire for wealth in an aggressive manner. On the other hand, flaunting one's wealth is seen socially inappropriate. So the two screenshots I put here are from an instructor who works as a foot massage therapist. And he used lip syncing to humorously portray himself as being low income after 1 year of hard work. But this actually wasn't true. He admitted to me that he actually got a decent income. He just deliberately used self-deprecation to portray himself to maintain a humble and modest image that is acknowledged in Enshi. And the two videos actually received positive feedback from the viewers. As you can see, a lot of like laughing and thumbs up emojis were left in the comment section. And I checked the profile of those commenters. Quite a few of them are based in Enshi. And the two videos received over 150 likes, which is not bad for an ordinary Douyin user. So all of these online interactions reflect the acceptance of this self-deprecation by the local. In this case, the interlocutor skillfully used multimedia elements to align with the cultural norms. And And this demonstrates how digital technology can serve as a tool for the individuals to regulate their behavior and support cultural norms, which highlights the humanized aspect of the digital. And another value that is emphasized in Enshi is the pursuit of stability, the preference for stable life over the risk-taking behaviors. And this is often linked to the life philosophy of contentment. So the two screenshots I put here shows how my interlocutors express and promote their contented mindset on Douyin. The first one is my interlocutor selfie, and the caption says, "Happiness and being ordinary are the most romantic things." And the second is a flower discovered by chance. And the author says, beautiful and good life doesn't need too much. So the two interlocutors conveying their life philosophy by sharing these subtle yet delightful things in their lives. The mindset of contentment is a positive cultural norm, and the creating and sharing of short videos make it more visible and shareable, which benefits the stability of our society. And platforms like Douyin even have the policies to boost this socially beneficial content by giving it more online exposure. This highlights how digital technology can support human welfare, in contrast to the ideology that emphasizes its dehumanizing and negative effects. So all the values displayed by the Enshi people are closely connected to their identification as residents of the fourth-tier city. So the city-tier system is more than just a broad, a bureaucratic classification. It carries a broad identification and discourse. So when Enshi people express their life philosophy online, they suggest that they are not like or don't want to be like the residents of the first-tier cities who are of ambition, stress, and challenge-driven spirit. This is how Enshi people situate themselves within a particular hierarchical system of living spaces, and the involvement of digital practices makes this positioning more apparent. And the distinction in self-identification and attitude towards life closely tied to the city-tier system is quite common in China. And this underlies the importance of ranking in China, as Danny mentioned earlier, and shows how it is applied to the hierarchy of places. So to conclude here, Enshi people use short video social media to reflect and reinforce local normativity. Additionally, the unique city-tier system and the associated identification become more visible through the mediation of short video platforms. These humanized and social good aspects of the social media challenge the dominant Western ideology surrounding the digital. And in this short talk, I use two fieldwork examples to show how my chapter corresponds to the two big themes of our book. One is how to understand digital differently in China, and how to understand China through the digital. And they also demonstrate the originality of my work and differentiated from the majority of conventional social media research, in which emphasis has been put upon the unprecedentedness of social media. And the concerns about the unprecedented and discussions on whether they are good or not often lead people fail to see some other qualities of social media. Instead, I concentrate on the continuity of short video social media. They do impact, but not necessarily in a way that terminates the past. The short video social media enhance people's ability to create and share visual content, and making the norms more visible and shareable through multimedia. And the norms are validated and reinforced through online interactions. These impacts actually continue the precedent rather than erasing it. And normativity is very important in anthropology. Because of the development of the digital technology, it becomes more complex for us to know how people engage with and construct the norms within its framework. So this chapter addresses one dimension of this issue by focusing on the normativity presented in visual form and the interplay between people's social media posting and cultural norms. And in my broader PhD thesis, I aim to explore this issue further and propose a theory of digital normativity. And that's all for today's talk. Thank you so much.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ken. It's quite a pleasure to share some of my findings from the PhD project. It's called The Backstage of Social Media. And by examining how those Chinese IT professionals design, maintain, and operate social media on a daily basis, my chapter in this book is trying to show how the production of the digital technology in China reflect long-standing cultural tradition, and through the manner it also create a change. So since 2020, I have been doing the field work in Zhongguancun in Beijing. So basically, this is a science hub in China, quite similar to the Silicon Valley. And during the field work, I was worked as a product management, and I was fortunate enough to get all access to the backstage work. And it is that experience gradually made me to understand that the backstage of social media is organized around the production, storage, and the distribution of the user-generated content. So they call it informatic cosmology. And then I come to analyze, actually there is a vast information infrastructure that actually sustains the circulation of the user-generated content. So this is kind of my broader PhD program. And today I will use the recommendation system, what has been imagined, the most algorithm-driven system as a cross session to show how this informatic infrastructure actually works. So actually recommendation system actually include two steps. One is called recalling, another is called sorting. So sorting basically is fit with the general imagination of what a recommendation system is. It's basically using algorithm to match users' interest with those different contents. But before the sorting process, we have a process called recalling. Recalling is a process that help us determine the range of the content we want to recommend it to users. So during the field work, I met a cohort of developers who claim they want to improve the technical efficiency of the recommendation system for the short video platform they decide. And they show me how they actually did that. So we could see from the graph. Actually, the first step is they set up a user group, and they pick out the user who is aged from 20 to 30 and who graduated from top university, have a decent job, a decent income. And they chose this user group as the dictator of the taste. The second, they build up a database based on the viewing history of this user group. So every short video that have been fully viewed by this user group will be included in this database. So after they have this database, this bunch of the developers get together in a big conference room. They just go through every short video inside this database one by one and manually decided which short video they regard as vulgar, and they just delete them. So one of my informers says she just couldn't stand any chicken feed. So if she worked for the company long enough, there will not any video have the image of chicken feed. So in the end, after they build up this recalling process, and in the end, actually it contributes a situation, what I call the gentrification of the internet. We could imagine that the short video platform they decide eventually become a place only overflowed with those middle class, urban, metropolitan lifestyle. And what the life in the third place and the rural area, as Chun and Kunyu present, is relatively underrepresented in this short video platform. So this is a story about taste and class, and there is a strong contradictory inside this story. When I do the interview with these developers, they never describe there is cultural reference. They just describe their work in exclusive in technical terms. All such design is out of it's out of technical consideration. We do that for the commercial purpose to maximize user engagement. They just tell me that. But when we actually look into those processes and the fieldwork actually reveals something different. So that leads to another question. Why will these Chinese developers presuming the cultural reference of those metropolitan user group should be the dictator of the taste, and it's reasonable to impose such taste to the general public? So this could be better explained by the specific roles assigned by the company and their social background inside China. So they become the architect of the recommendation system. It's closely related to their social background and the education system in China. So the highly competitive education in China efficiently channel those middle class and only kids child in the big city into those elite uni. And then when in the recent years, when the internet became the most profitable industry in China, it's just naturally drawing those elite graduates into the IT workplace. So it's their social background largely dictate what they consider as good taste. So because we could see, so basically the user group they chose is much similar to their own social background. And it's their position within the company, within the production line of digital technology, further encourage them to promote the contents through which they could produce their class. And this is not so much different from what Baudier has discussed, how the middle class in the French society have reproduced their class by the domination of the taste. And more broadly, this could be explained with the large background how China is achieved its modernization through cultivating a highly ambitious and well-educated population with high 数字. So here I also want to propose my backstage ethnography. Instead of, I want to trace the social influence of digital technology back to the designing process. And by this process, I want to show, like, as anthropology, we could, and it's significant to record what have been generally considered as a black box process. And by doing so, we could show inside the big, complicated technical system, there is not just people and technology, but also the wider social force that create the people who create technology. And this is the one of the many cases I include in my thesis that illustrate how the digital make the people who make the technology. So if you want to follow my work, there is a QR code you could scan.
Right, thanks everyone. We are nearly out of time. So what I'm going to do is say these three wonderful examples. Actually, within the book, there are many more. The book includes chapters. In fact, the first chapter is actually a study of period tracking apps for women in China. There are chapters on how TV media is modernizing through nostalgia. We have a chapter on the digital impact on education through to Gaokao and elderly care. The only one I will mention though is because one of the aims of the book is to recognize that a huge amount of the research is conducted by Chinese scholars and published in Chinese. And actually, one of the issues here is that we, people like me, do not have access to that. So the other thing the book has is a long chapter written by some of the key Chinese scholars, which summarizes work that up to now has only been available in Chinese, and the book will make available to wider audiences, but we also hope the book itself will be available in Chinese. So it's that sort of cross. To conclude, what I said is we couldn't do everything the book is trying to do. We focused really on the changing ideology between, or the difference in ideology between the West and China in terms of what we actually mean by the digital, but you could probably see how that also changes one's ideas about the possibility of anthropology in terms of providing new perspectives on things like the digital and keeping up to date with things that are rapidly changing, but also ultimately trying to understand a China that is now very much a digital China. And the juxtaposition of what I tried to do and the three talks you just heard is central to the book. Because actually, if you're going to try to do a book like that, it's very much about scale. That one is trying to recognize that one is dealing sometimes with global systems that are not specific to China at all, the rise of the visual and many other things that we're concerned with when we're doing digital studies. It's concerned with things that do seem to relate to, in this case, what we talked about, the archaeology of the digital in China, or the ranking system that has come up in several of these papers, and this is like habitus of ranking that go through a number of different systems within China. But then below that, you've got all these differences within China. So the differences between Anxi as a fourth-tier city as compared to, first-tier villages, etc. And within that, you've got these ethnographic studies that also really ultimately show the humanism of anthropology in trying to give you a sense of how individuals struggle with this, like people like Nima in Chun study. And so that what anthropology always wants to do is to retain that sense of breadth, that we do not lose our empathy and understanding of the individual people and the diversity, but nevertheless will attempt to try and see kind of the woods as well as the trees in looking at how these correspond to much wider and longer issues that are developed across regions and across the world. Whether the book could do all of that, you're going to have to see. Okay, thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Now we're going to open for questions, and we will try and juggle questions. Oh, hang on, I should unmute myself. We'll try and juggle questions. I will not mute myself. In the room and online. So online people, either raise your hand or put a question in the chat. And those of you in the room, so that people online can hear, we have a microphone. So we would ask you to speak into the microphone. I will kick things off just to say how pleased I am that you are taking a longue durée approach. And one of the things that does is it protects you from a kind of millenarian approach that says now it's digital, the past is irrelevant, which is one of the things that I consistently have been kind of arguing against in this seminar, and it was very nice to hear that being said today. So I'll leave that just as a comment. Questions, please. Let's start on the room. My God, we've got 1,500. So I'll let Bill choose. Can you give us your name, please?
I'm David. I'm from the geography department in OxDEG. I have a question for Ken and Kunyu. I think you guys have teased out the detention between your arguments. So can you talk about the normativity, the rise of middle class culture, whereas you talk about the single tiers and the system, where the lower tier people can in the digital. But isn't that form a very interesting comparison, right? Normativity versus sources from the margin. So is there any conversation that can be made? Thank you.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, because like for my project, it was built around the first year people, and actually someone said that this kind of life philosophy may be not unique for the ancient people, but I think that is why the work of me is like of importance, because we don't want to research something that is so unique. We want to see how it is applies to other like maybe city county level cities in China. So this is a kind of like case to show that what I found in my field work, and they still have contrast with Ken's work, because she studies the people in the high end, in the like the IT industry, and all of them, they have this kind of elite background. So I think it's a kind of good comparison to show how the normativity is constructed on different group of people. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's collective say how the digital was used as a discourse, and through that discourse, people trying to claim who they are, even though they were quite different. So you could see with the same, not the same digital discourse, but digital has been used as a discourse, and people use them to build their own like class or identity.
Thank you. We've got two questions online which I will merge together. Actually, both about the research on Enshui. One is asking about the ethics of collecting open access data from social media, and the other asking more about the field work and how you went about collecting your data.
So basically, I think one important thing is you need to take a lot of time to form a good relationship with your interlocutors. And I do not just go directly at our first meeting and say, hey, can I just collect your data on social media? So it's like after a time we spend together and we become familiar with each other. And when the people like feel they are comfortable, they were like, they will just share something they post on their social media. And also I will make them informed that if I want to use this case in my writing, I will tell this to my interlocutor and obtain the consent from them. So I think one thing is you need to spend a lot of time to make trust and good relationship with your interlocutors. And the second thing is you need to make them informed that you are doing this kind of data connection.
Thank you. Somebody else in the room?
Thank you very much. I have two brief questions for Ken, actually. Well, I really like the presentation. Thank you so much. Oh, I'm Yuan Zhang Yuan from anthropology department, and I'm a team of students. My first question would be, because you mentioned like how these middle class discourses kind of an unintended consequence. But if we note these differences between different short video platforms, for example, Kuaishou will be more intended to be the so-called sunken market, 下沉市场. So my question would be, how might the backstages work differently in these different companies when they can focus on different group of people, and from there, how unintended would the consequences be? To what extent is the kind of business strategy to let's say differentiating different groups for marketing? And the second question would be, if you worked in this company as kind of usual usual officer, would that need consent from the company itself for ethical purposes?
Yeah, I could answer the second first. So I was super lucky. I get access to the company, and because I'm not in my anthropology background, I could do the user research, and I also learned a lot how to make a particular product. So basically, I was there helping them to build the product together, and let them to take advantage of my ethnography background. And so it's like collaboration process, and I don't know, I just kind of convinced them this is a great way to help them know. And actually, during the whole process of doing the fieldwork, I always think what I could bring to my research to the informers. And to the first one, it's much more complicated. I just show a cross section of the recommendation system here, and actually, inside the recommendation system alone, let alone the commercial, like bigger commercial plan. So maybe this is just one of the development plan, and maybe another thing is trying to promote what you call such promote rural area, and based on different thinking process. And sometimes you will find like the different system they decide actually contradict with each other. So it's hard to say like this platform is totally targeting the urban population or targeting the rural population, because they were different. And I also showed in the slide there is a fiction called interest explosion. They will recognize that totally relevant what your interest. So you will see that different elements contradict with each other.
Thank you. We haven't got any more online, so we can have more in the room as well at the back, or
My name is Zheng. I'm teaching global and area studies, and I have one for everyone. So the title of the seminar, Digital Anthropology, and thinking about the anthropology part. So as Professor Miller mentioned, all of you are still kind of following the people, studying the people who uses digital devices. And also you mentioned that during the research, you also need to build a whole to get research with research. So, but by looking at digital, is it how anthropology is changing, or is it just expand one new area, which is digital, or even like ethnography? If you look at the people with digital devices, does it change the way you conduct ethnography, or it's more like just doing conventional ethnography, just looking at the people with digital devices?
Thank you very much. I mean, I think at one level we are very conventional. We are trying to maintain very classical traditions in the sense that most of our studies are 16 months. And essentially it has this kind of holistic aspiration. That is to say, unlike a lot of other studies of the digital, we believe that to understand the online, 80% of your time has to be understanding the offline. In other words, you have to know about education, you have to know about family life, nobody lives inside this topic, right? The part of anthropology is to situate the topic within life, as lived, right? So in that sense, very traditional, very holistic. It does change in as much as, of course, the digital provides new, unprecedented areas in which people are engaged, and therefore we equally have to be engaged. So we follow along the digital. But I also think that one of the key points that what does it mean to say it's changing people's understanding of anthropology? I think that one of the things we're trying to do is to show that even though we take this long-term view of doing the 60 months, whatever it is, that people might think that anthropology is a discipline more attenuated to kind of, traditional, topics like kinship or slower moving. can we actually cope with this incredibly dynamic, fast-moving world? And oddly enough, I think we are the one group that really can, because actually the digital world is still, in the end, a question of the consequences of those changes for people. So if anything, as the world gets more private and more online, you need ethnography even more than you ever did before, because we have to be present where life is lived. And if this is where life is lived, yes, that transforms anthropology, but in order to have the same conventional aspirations that anthropology always had.
I just want to say the way that I see digital anthropology is really digital is a perspective that you can use to see how the society is changing and the relationship between, for example, my research between individuals and society in the way that how change is made to happen. So it is conventional in the way that I'm still very interested in, and my main question is about the key anthropological question that anthropology has been asking since for years. And the new part is, I believe digital is providing a new perspective to understand this question and to provide a new way to look at how this dynamics that anthropologists are studying is actually unfolding with the development of the digital.
Yeah, I agree. All you just mentioned, I just have a little thing to say. Yeah, I think it becomes really hard to distinguish what people do online and offline, because like the social media practices have been very deeply integrated into our daily practices. And there is a methodology term called holistic contextualization, and this is very important in the previous publication of Danny. Basically, it says about in order to understand people's online activities, you need to understand and know about what they do offline. And I will give a small example in my fieldwork. So sometimes I notice that people's images they presented online are quite different from what they are actually doing or and their images offline. So this kind of distinction and different presentation itself can be an interesting anthropological topic to explore. So yeah, if we want to know, if we want to do anthropology, and that's focused on the digital life of people, we definitely need to know how they act offline in order to better understand their online practices.
Yeah, I've got some something online. We've got several actually, but okay. This is all three empirical presentations seem to focus on the market logic or norms of capital being disseminated by technology. I was wondering, what's your thoughts on this broader phenomenon of techno-capitalism in the Chinese context and the distinct role of technology in this process? I don't know who wants to take that one up.
I would actually say that if you look at the different projects we're doing, I'm not sure it's that helpful to overgeneralize a term like that, because even if we're talking about capitalism, the way it's operating in relation to things like the state, the way it's operating in relation to things like Zheng's discussion of local market trading, which actually has a lot to do with issues around trade and the meaning of money that were there before capitalism, and have been characteristic of that area of China. I actually would dispute the question. I think that really what we're trying to do is pay attention to many differences and many changes, that while you could put them under the umbrella of techno-capitalism, I'm not sure that actually that really helps the project of trying to distinguish these specificities, which to us are actually extremely important.
So I was working with what have been imagined as the techno-capitalism, the tech company, but my ethnography actually revealed what we thought is maximize the profit making. Actually, it's not. In my thesis, I recall many cases how the product actually failed and didn't make profit at all. So it's more important to focus on their situated strategies and their thinking process, their individual experience, and how that contributes to the production of digital technology in the end.
Yeah, we're gonna have more in the room.
I think so, yeah.
Thanks for the talk, all of you. My name is Zheng. I'm a degree student in anthropology. I have a very broad question, maybe for all of you. Because when researchers were doing China studies, we seem to tend to place a great emphasis on something quite peculiar to China. For example, you just mentioned the Chinese characteristics in these almost three ethnographic examples. So because I think for anthropology, it's also very important to explore the shared humanity behind these like various cultural or social phenomena. So my question is, how do you like deal with or balance the peculiar and general tensions? Thank you.
Very briefly, even before this particular book, the work I've been involved in is global. And actually the field sites are, Brazil and Italy, and other places as well. And that's a great base for thinking about this question, because I think we don't want to have prejudices towards any level of the scale. We are very comfortable making global generalizations. So the conclusion of a lot of the project we did before is to transform understanding what a smartphone is. That we now think of the smartphone not as a phone, but this thing we call the transport phone, the place within which we live. And we would argue that is a radical change in our understanding of smartphones and pertains pretty much to everywhere. The rise of visual conversation, the rise of perpetual optics, a lot of things we talk about are global. Also, at the other end, the talks, I think, have been very eloquent in not talking about the Chinese as homogeneous. The whole point, I would say, of, for example, Chun Liu's talk is talking about this diversity, but equally there's diversity of media. Yunnan and Zheng is different again. So we do want to talk about Chinese characteristics, but we are very careful to see this in scalable terms. In other words, to recognize there are global changes that we know we can call global because they're also there in China. There are all the local diversity in China, which we think is absolutely essential. So we do not overgeneralize a thing called China, but also, as in the early part of the talk, one is prepared to talk about long traditions that relate specifically to China and that remain of considerable importance. And it's one of the things the book is very much trying to do is to try and keep a balance and attention to all of these different things simultaneously.
Thank you for your question. I see that it's a very interesting anthropology about the tension between the particular and the universal. And my take on that is by looking at the particular facts, the particular characteristics in my fieldwork, I'm trying to answer universal questions. So I'm trying to, instead of see what is universal facts or universal characteristics of human beings, I'm trying to bring the specific answers to all the anthropologists are asking in their own field. And by providing my particular answer to this big question, I become part of the whole spectrum of this anthropology, and then that can make comparison possible. By saying that, I would say I don't see my own job as making the universal conclusion about humankind, but I see myself as making a contribution to that project by giving my specific answer to the universal question. And then if you put all the specific answers together, then maybe you will be able to make comparison and see what is universal in humankind, and what is the diversity lies?
So in my case, actually, it's really hard to like define what is global, what is China, like all the tech. So empirically, it's all the technical terms they use is come from Silicon Valley, and but how those digital discourse is achieved is mediated by the local discourse, local value, like I presented in the I discussed before. And now the new trend is when these Chinese IT companies are starting to marketing overseas markets, you could see those IT practice with those Chinese characteristics, it's become globalization. So it's not totally divided. You could see that from the empirical evidence, there is no concord.
Yeah, well, maybe we take a few, like two or
Yeah.
we'll take like two or three as a.
Let's do that, because there's quite a few questions. So I start here.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I was interested like social dynamics in China and many technical class and my name is Chun Liu, and I was what's your views on anthropology, and my research interests are AI. So actually, because not many anthropologists discuss the topic of AI, but I'm wondering if there's any room for people who are like interested in AI for the development of teacher anthropology, and it's a question to this and how do you position AI in anthropology?
We'll take two more for you on.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that interesting talk and talks. My name is Olivia. I'm part of the master class PMMA, so Visual Museum Anthropology. And my question centers a bit around health data. So the beginning of the talk on the book in general, briefly like the state was mentioned as well, with like welfare and the digital space. And I was wondering now at the end, seeing that, for example, period apps were a part of research in the book as well. I was wondering how maybe COVID changed the perspective on digital and like health data. Because WeChat, I believe, was a big thing during COVID, with like the certificates being positive and negative, and also in comparison to this whole us in the West being afraid of like the digital as a threat in regards to data security, how it's different in China. It's a bit of a big question. I hope you know. Thank you.
Last question. I have a question about mushrooms. Because I got from second-hand evidence that, for example, there are ways in which mushroom growers in central China have been able to not go via bosses, but to go all the way into overseas markets, almost directly through WeChat and selling their products. And I wonder, so is this, I think somebody asked earlier, how different is this? I mean, all these new technologies were supposed to disintermediate economic relationships. And I think that kind of shows that. I think where your study is kind of slightly different is that these people have come to travel to this place and then establish a relationship. But I wonder both, A, do your mushroom sellers sell directly overseas? And B, do they also sell to people who they haven't yet encountered, and do they sell through kind of some other?
So we have one over here.
Let's squeeze one more.
Squeeze one more in.
Yeah.
for anyone's comment really. Thank you all. It's great to see this long collaborations coming to fruition with the book. I was really interested in going back to your long durée, the reception of digital anthropology as as two words put together, as it were, in China, in your different field sites. At the interface of everyday research participants, sort of a sense of what digital anthropology kind of means. In other countries, other contexts, there are interests of fascinating, ranging from fascinating to spying. So in a context where there's so much, surveillance is a very particular impact, I was wondering how digital anthropology is received on the ground, as it were. Thank you.
All great questions. So whoever wants to give us AI, health data and COVID, mushrooms, and then a kind of meta one about digital anthropology.
I could answer the AI one. Yeah, that's my expertise. Actually, AI is quite a wide industry, and it depends on like which specific niche area you are research about. So, but personally, I will start with tracing the flow of the data, like all the AI was fed by those data, and if you trace the data from the very beginning, you could see who is like low risk train the data and who is like middle range counties, and modify those data, and who is like high rank data science. They have totally different value, and the world will how they imagine those data. So if you trace the whole social life of the data, you could like make a map of the AI, even inside that particular niche of the industry. I'd say something about the surveillance. Yeah, because I also research on the recommending the content moderation, and mine is not official. They actually set up content moderation center and hire thousands of people 24 hours moderate those user generated data. And the reason driving them to do such practice is from the pressure from the state, because states they didn't want any political sensitive content on the platform. But like on the ground practitioners, they also got different understanding of the political climate in China. So it's different skill in my ethnology.
Yeah, I want to add something for the question about how to study AI through anthropology. So I think my concern is that you may find different stakeholders about this topic, like who use AI and who are the people who experience the outcome of AI. So I will make this question parallel to the study of algorithms, and my work and Ken's work are actually a good comparison. So because I research on the user end, I research on how the users of social media experience the outcome of the algorithm. Well, Ken studies the people who design and construct the logic of algorithms. So it's kind of different perspective from different stakeholders. So I think we want to research something that is like quite technological and a little bit abstract. We may figure out who are the people get involved in this process and figure out which user group you want to focus on.
Thank you for the question about mushroom. So first to answer the two questions about facts, whether there are people who send massive mushroom by WeChat overseas. As far as I know, I don't know any local traders in the Shangri-La area is doing that. But I know that some traders are working with Japanese companies. For example, there are like second boats who then send the mushroom to company Shangri-La, and then Shangri-La will send them directly to Japan. And then there's more like probably traditional mode. And the reason why it's not happening about doing WeChat with overseas customers, there are two large reasons. One of them is about the particular materiality of master topic mushroom, because instead of like mushroom growing in middle China, this master topic mushroom is so expensive because it's so difficult to keep it fresh. So if you want to sell it to customers, it has to be kept at exactly 3 degree temperature. So to keep the matsutake into sleep. And then when it arrives within 24 hours, the matsutake is still fresh and still have this particular smell of the forest, so-called. Then for those local traders, it's very difficult for them to get this kind of very high-end logistics service to the overseas. There are very popular service within China, it's from the company, but as far as I know, there's no very popular ways to do this kind of local service to overseas. And the second reason I would say is because most of the local traders, they don't know brands or customers from overseas. And it leads to your second question about the bags. Have they ever sell mushroom to people they have never met before? Yes, they have, but not really as an intermediate people, but more like they sell mushroom to this consumer, and this consumer thinking, oh, this is great. And I happen to know another brand who also like this mushroom that I'll introduce him to this trader. So that's like, yes, they sell brands, but it's still very highly intermediated. Then it leads to my point is that the digital difference that WeChat is making is not to make things less intermediated or disintermediated. I would say the trade is still very heavily and socially intermediated. But what the difference is it is making is that it's compressing the time and the space. By saying that, it's like within the same long chain, that samely intermediate long chain of conventional mode, let me say digital, the chain became shorter because the distance is and the time is really compressed. That things can happen immediately instead of need to travel with time and space. So, so to answer your question, I would say the thing about the difference that WeChat is making is not to make things less mediated, but rather to compress time and space.
I think the only question that wasn't addressed was the one over there. So very briefly, yes, a lot of our work is concerned with these issues around health. For example, the one on period tracking apps is really interesting because actually what this does is provide a forum, not just for anthropologists, but Chinese women generally have been quite diffident about studying things like sexual practices. So when you have an app that also has a domain where people can actually, in a sense, compare themselves, so the normativities of sexual practices is something now that is kind of evident and under discussion through the period tracking apps in a way that probably is quite unprecedented. And that's been an interesting component of what's going on. COVID accelerated a lot of these processes by providing reasons for using these online fora. But I think these processes were happening anyway. And you can see that in terms of the people exploiting these possibilities of the online. But the other point is that things like the data, etc., is also exploited, as it were, as a discourse ideology. So, for example, the paper we have from Wang Xinwen on a care home in Shanghai is all about how people sell their services by claims around things like an emphasis on the modernity of data and indeed AI. These things then become, and it goes back to the very beginning, the way people make claims about being modern and the moralities around, whether we should or should not have these systems, say, of surveillance as a component of care. And these are very central. So in the book and indeed a lot of other work, these are things we discuss in more detail.
Okay, I know there may be a few other questions in the room, but I'd like to suggest that we proceed to the pub around the corner to continue this conversation. You're very welcome to join. We're going to go to the Rose and Crown, you may know it, on North Parade, the anthropology problem, as we sometimes call it. I just want to thank again Danny Miller and his co-contributors very much for their presentation today and for starting this conversation about digital anthropology in China. All right, please do come and join us in the public.